Mr. Review presents Political Parties, Campaigns and Elections, a citizenu.org production. No fancy words, no fancy suits. Plain talk about issues you need to know, just in time. Political parties. Political parties are much weaker today. They are even weaker at the local state level or grassroots level. Federalism means we have more decentralized parties. A Republican in Georgia much more conservative than a Republican in New York. Today, elections are determined less by party affiliation and more by personal followings. I'm voting for candidate X, less because he's a Democrat and more because I like him. Parties do, however, play an important role. They select and sort issues, but most importantly, they choose our candidates in primary elections. They provide us easy-to-use labels. The Democratic Party is much more factionalized, much more diverse. The Republican Party, much more bureaucratized, organized. The Democrats have a much fairer distribution of power. Let's look at a short history of political parties. George Washington, our first president, warned against the dangers of factions. Originally, candidates were chosen through caucuses. This was not very democratic, so people called for national party conventions, so more and more people could be involved in selecting candidates. This gave greater local control in the presidential nominating process. Party conventions give greater power to the rank and file, to the everyday worker of the political party. Take power away from the party bosses. Of course, this means our nominating process is much more democratic. Even more so today because now primary elections choose candidates. A primary election is a simple ballot where each individual has the opportunity to select the candidate of their choice. Another example of how democracy has increased over time, the use of referendums, where people vote directly on a public policy issue. What's a realignment? Realignments or critical elections occur when a single issue provokes large numbers of voters to change their party affiliation. Examples of realignments would be the election of 1860, or in 1932, when African Americans, because of the economic depression, shifted their loyalty from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party. This was a realignment of African American voters. Today, appealing to moderates has become the greatest challenge. There is such a significant difference between party activists and rank and file. One could say we have ideological polarization. Republicans, Democrats. Why only two? The answer, quite simple. Plurality elections. The candidate with the most votes wins. With only two major candidates, the winner of all election holds a majority of the votes. This brings greater legitimacy and higher efficacy. Political parties have only one goal: to win and win. The result, of course, with only two political parties become broad-based coalitions rather than single-issue, narrow, small interest groups. Winner-take-all elections give no incentive to finish second. Let's now turn our attention to presidential campaigns. Of all the elections, these have the largest turnout. If you want to be president, your first goal is to get mentioned. And then you take aim at winning your party's nomination. Primary elections are extremely important here. You first must appeal to the activists. These are the most likely to vote, the base party members. Contrast this with the general election, where you must appeal to moderates. Democratic voters in primary elections much more liberal. Republican voters in primary elections much more conservative. Presidential elections by far the most competitive races in our democracy. Close outcomes usually deny presidential electoral mandates. And coattails, when presidents are so popular, their party receives significant victories, far more unusual. How about congressional campaigns? Tip O'Neill's famous quote, "All politics is local." However, at times congressional elections become nationalized. This increases turnover amongst incumbents. Today, the House of Representatives is fixed at 435. Those seats are determined by reapportionment, the redrawing of congressional districts every 10 years. Sometimes you might hear about sophomore surge, which means it is always easier to win after winning for the first time. Incumbency rates are high. That is, once you've won, the likelihood of winning again, over 90%. National elections are when national issues dominate local congressional races. This is far more unusual. Congressional races must abide by campaign finance laws. But unlike presidential races, there is no public financing here. Speaking of campaign finance, presidential elections raise both private and public monies. Public finance and matching funds give an incentive to small donors. It is an attempt to address the perception that fat cats have too much influence. Recently, the Bipartisan Campaign Finance Reform Act eliminated unlimited soft money, but increased individual donor limits to an indexed $2,000. Incumbents continue to have significant advantages. One such advantage is the franking privilege, giving members of Congress free access to postage. How about the modern campaign? Clearly, the modern campaign, we've seen an increase in TV broadcasting and ads. Many more debates, which run the risk of verbal slip-ups. And with TV, we see the rise of image over ideas. Party identification, however, is still the most important determinant of our votes. Democrats seem to be losing Catholics, Southerners, and even Union voters. Republicans tend to be more loyal. Campaigns are long, but they allow us, the voter, to see the candidate's character and ability to handle pressure. Mr. Review presents Political Parties, Campaigns and Elections, a citizenu.org production. No fancy words, no fancy suits. Plain talk about issues you need to know. Just in time.